Last week we did 39. Today we will look at 40, which is a short chapter. I'm pretty sure we can get through that whole thing. Might even be able to start 41. So if you want to find that in a Bible somewhere, Genesis 40, I will do the same. Okay. And first I will pray, then we'll read a little bit. Father, as is often the case on Sunday morning, many of us have been rushing around trying to get everything together, making sure we got here reasonably on time. And so now that we're here, we ask that you would help us to focus on your word. We know that you want to meet with us. We know that you want to feed us. Pray that you would give us ears to hear. Help me as I lead. Help us all as we contribute. Prepare us for worship. And bless the all-age Sunday school class, which is studying the same story these days. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. They're a little farther along than we are. They've gotten to the story of Pharaoh's dreams, which is the next chapter. But that's all right. So, looking around, most of you have been here for the previous chapters. Joseph's life has been a series of ups and downs. We're at a down moment right now. First, he was the second youngest of 12 brothers, but he had dreams indicating that he would one day have a position of eminence. His brothers became jealous. They were thinking about just leaving him in the pit or even killing him, but then they did sell him, and he was taken down to Egypt. And he became kind of the chief steward in the house of a guy named Potiphar, a very high official in the Egyptian government. And then Potiphar's wife decided she would try to seduce Joseph, and because that didn't work, she accused him of assaulting her, and Joseph was thrown in prison. We said last week that it's possible Potiphar knew what kind of woman he was married to, otherwise he would have just executed Joseph outright. So Joseph is now on a down. He is in prison. And but it's interesting that the narrator at the end of each chapter will often sort of give a segue to the next chapter. And as Joseph has been in prison, suddenly he's elevated to a very high position in prison. He basically has the same position in prison that he had in Potiphar's house, which is that the chief of the prison guard just kind of says, you can handle everything. And that's all at the end of chapter 39. Okay? And now in chapter 40, we meet a couple of characters, the cupbearer and the baker. I'll say ahead of time that these would have been very high-ranking, don't say officials, but let's say positions in the Egyptian court, chiefly to make sure that Pharaoh did not get poisoned. Okay, his cupbearer and the baker, but they've gotten themselves in trouble, and so they're in prison with Joseph. Let's read a little bit. I'm going to hand out pieces of this to various people here. Any of you want to do a little bit of reading for us? Marcia, can you read 1 to the end of 4? Doug Williams, can you read 5 to the end of 8? Let's see here. Josiah, can you read 9 to the end of 15? Who else had a hand up? Was that Linda? Would you read 16 through the end of 19? And I'll finish out with the last 3 verses. So whenever you guys are ready. Chapter 40.
Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down from there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. And
Are we in? What's that?
949. Sorry.
Yeah. I was thinking that it sounded awfully familiar. So.
My apologies.
All right.
Chapter 40.
Yeah. Well, actually, did we do 1 through 4? No. All right. So somebody read chapter 40, verses 1 through 4. Did I assign that to somebody? Okay. Okay. And then. All right. Sorry, I was making sure my phone was off, which is a good thing, but a little distracting. So I hate to have it ring during Sunday school. All right, try it again there, Linda, in 39, or 40. One night.
All right. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt.
Yeah.
And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. They continued for some time in custody.
And one night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers, who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" And they said to him, "We have had dreams, and there's no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me."
So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed. Its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." Then Joseph said to him, "This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly, when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me in this."
So if I could interject here just a minute, so the baker's like, "Wow, what a great interpretation of that dream. My turn." But he's not going to get quite the same good news. So fire away on verse 16 there, please.
When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, "I also had a dream, and there were 3 cakes baked on my head. And in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head." And Joseph answered and said, "This is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you."
And on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Okay, so now we're ending on a very low note, which is that Joseph has done this great favor, but he's still going to languish in prison for a while because the person did not remember him, even though he asked. So we don't know what these two did, whether it was the same offense, probably different ones, and whether Pharaoh later on found something out and found more evidence and was able to exonerate one and condemn the other. So the nature of their offense is not stated. But whatever it was serious because, where does it say this? Yeah, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt. Now, if you've read a lot in the Old Testament, you've read the word Pharaoh quite a bit, but you probably never saw the phrase king of Egypt. It's not a common narrative term for Pharaoh. So it's emphasizing the very seriousness of their crime against the sovereign of the entire nation, perhaps the most powerful nation in the Middle East at this time. And then we have this phrase, captain of the guard, which is repeated twice in these verses. Verse 3, captain of the guard. Verse 4, captain of the guard. And this stresses their experience in prison and reminds us of Potiphar, because that's the phrase for him. In fact, a couple of commentators have wondered, why isn't Potiphar is referred to in chapter 39 as captain of the guard, and also chapter 37. So why not use his name here? Is this actually the same guy? But I said last week that many commentators, including Calvin, feel this prison was actually in Potiphar's house. And so it's reminding us of the circumstances that led Joseph here. And the idea is that, to sound a little trite, you can't keep a good man down. Throw him in prison, but he's still going to rise to the top. And the narrator stresses this by reminding us of how he got there, using the phrase for Potiphar twice in verses 3 and 4. Meyer, a guy whom I hope to quote a couple of more times here, F.B. Meyer, as a 19th century commentator, he writes this: "Just as any man can ruin a position of honor through pride and corruption, so any man can ennoble a low position through integrity and diligence." Okay, so this is what Joseph keeps getting tossed out, but his integrity and diligence keeps rising to the top, as though everyone can see the sort of sterling character he has, and no matter what position he's in, he keeps getting assigned these areas of major responsibility. So these two guys, the cupbearer and the baker, they've had dreams. And in the ancient Near East and the ancient Middle East, dreams were generally taken to be some sort of prophetic or some sort of divine prophecy. God is telling you something through these dreams. And so you would have this retinue of people around to help you interpret your dreams. But these guys are in prison, so there's no retinue there. They've got no one to help them. No wonder they're downcast. They're thinking, we both had similar dreams. They must have been talking to each other. We both had similar dreams. They made quite an impression on us, but we have no access to the usual soothsayers in Pharaoh's court who can help us understand this. So they're downcast. And who notices this? Who notices that they're downcast? Not a hard question. Joseph. Which is a remarkable little detail. You probably read right over that a number of times here. Here is Joseph, who's been through these ups and downs. He's terribly betrayed by his brothers. He's in a foreign country. He's separated from his family. He's been here for years now. Later on, we can actually put a finger on how long he's been here. It's been more than 10 years. I think by the time he gets out of prison, it's 13 years that he's been here. Separated from his family, he's in a pagan culture. He's been falsely accused. He's been thrown in jail. He's in the pit. But he's able to pay attention to the mere moods of the other men. It's not like they said something to him, we're having a bad day. He just noticed that they were both downcast. So that's a little sparkle indicating the type of person that Joseph was, his humility and his other-centeredness, even when he might have been wallowing in self-pity and despair. And Meyer notes that Joseph must have been somewhat social with these guys in order for him to notice their mood. It's possible he even had, these are probably the most distinguished prisoners in the prison. They're right at Pharaoh's right hand. So he must have had discussions with them. Possibly, if they've been here for a long time, possibly he learned a little bit about the dynamics of court life in Pharaoh's kingdom and what it was like to be a high-ranking official. Maybe this helped prepare him a little bit for what's coming in the next chapter, where he's going to be exalted very much to the right hand of Pharaoh. And there he will already be somewhat familiar, perhaps, with the uses and customs of power in Egypt, because he was hanging out with these guys who, they were at Pharaoh's right hand and would have been able to give him all kinds of info. So that's sort of leading up here to his interpretation of their dreams. Any thoughts, comments, or questions so far? I don't have an awful lot to say about chapter 40. It's one of the shorter chapters in the Joseph narrative. We good? Josiah?
Is there a difference between a cupbearer and like a wine taster? Or is that the same sort of thing?
The general understanding is it probably is the same thing. Yeah, that he would have a little bit of it to make sure, the ultimate thankless job. If it's poisoned, you're out of a job. If it's not poisoned, you're good, but if you do your job right, you're going to wind up dead sooner or later. So that's a pretty tough job, but I would think that's generally the understanding. Paul?
And also just because of that, because of his intimacy and the importance of his work, cupbearer often became kind of a symbolic title for his most important advisor and confidant, like Nehemiah. In the book, his book was he brought the wine to the king.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah, Nehemiah was serving in that office in, was it Babylon by then? Yeah, I get Babylon and Assyria mixed up. John?
Well, it's kind of related. You were asking for any general comments?
Sure.
So verse 15, I've always found it to be the most striking verse because Joseph doesn't blame his brothers there. And they're the obvious people to blame. I mean, it's just amazing. He's in prison and he's so kind to them.
Yeah. He doesn't say, he says, I was stolen out of the land of Hebrews and I've done nothing that they, talking about probably Potiphar and his officials, have put me in this pit. And what you're saying, John, is emphasized there by the use of the word pit. You all recognize that word. Some translations say dungeon. It's a prison. It's not a pit. But this is the same word in chapter 37. It's the same Hebrew word. So obviously this is, he's still thinking about this, but he doesn't verbally assign blame and say to these guys, look, I'm down here because my brothers are a bunch of rats and they sold me to Egypt. He speaks of it in rather general terms, and even if he's blaming anyone, it's blaming the guys in Egypt. So that's a good point. I thought, yeah, Dan, another hand.
As we were reading it, I was struck how very quickly it goes to an interpretation. They tell him the dream, and then this comment, this is its interpretation. So I pushed back and saw the introduction of that in verse at the end of 8. Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me. And I thought I figured he had to have recognized God's ability, and there it was. So he introduces the whole scenario with, at least a brief statement that this is from God.
Yeah. And it's interesting, now that you've mentioned that, Dan, I can't remember the exact discussion that accompanies Joseph's previous dealing with dreams way back in chapter 37. And I don't see Joseph here coming out and saying, clearly these dreams mean that I'm going to be your boss someday. He tells them the dreams, and they understand that this is the implication. But he doesn't say, now let me interpret for you these two dreams that I've had. So it's not like he has a long habit of interpreting dreams. If anybody interpreted them, it was the brothers who got so mad. So to me, it's an astounding act of faith that Joseph says, I'll tell you what they mean. He hadn't even heard the dreams yet, right? It's not like he heard the dreams and thought, I have a feeling I know what these mean. He just said, you tell them to me and God will help us figure it out. And it's an astounding statement of fact, a statement of faith. And he says the same thing to Pharaoh in the next chapter. God will help you figure it out before he's even heard the dream. Dan, did you have another question or comment?
Especially since the interpretation of his brother's dreams kind of got started from the trouble.
Yeah. So he might have thought, I think I'm through paying attention to dreams for a while. And we're going to jump ahead a little bit, but I think this is very well said that, I don't know what my notes are here. Yeah, that here and in chapter 41, he's going to interpret dreams confidently to the cupbearer and the baker, telling them your dreams are going to come true. And he says the same thing to Pharaoh. It's going to happen very quickly. God has given you two dreams to show you that it's going to happen soon. There's no evidence for this in Joseph's life. If anything, it's exactly the opposite. By the time he gets out of prison, you can do the math, it's 13 years. And so he's got to be thinking, I don't know whatever happened to those dreams I had, but clearly, whatever it is, it's not going to happen right away. And yet he tells, it's astounding that he still believes God is going to do all these things and is so active in the world, even though his own dreams, if anything, have been fulfilled in quite the opposite way of that he would have expected. Linda?
It just speaks to a relationship that he has with God. And it doesn't tell us everything that he went through every day. but he obviously is growing and maturing in his faith and his devotion, which is only getting stronger in spite of his circumstances. And he can boldly say, only God can tell the interpretations, tell me. It almost sounds kind of arrogant. Like, well, God knows the interpretations, but tell me what it is. I think God and I are buds. He'll tell me what it is. But in actuality, he does have that close relationship to be able to have the faith to withstand all that he's going through.
Yeah, and so this extreme guilelessness on Joseph's part can actually look like pride, except I don't think it is. It's just that he's completely free of ulterior motivations, it appears, which is not true of many human beings. Tom?
Yeah, this dream interpretation is really fascinating. And I'm thinking all the way to the witch's mentor with Saul, and then over to the gifts of the new church after Pentecost. Like, do you see any continuity between this real clear gifting of interpreting dreams to divination, or that whole like spirituality? How does that tie into Pentecost? Is there some?
I don't know if I would make a connection. I don't know if I would make a connection to Pentecost. There are some dreams in the New Testament that are clearly God speaking to the dreamer. If I'm remembering, Pilate's wife, and then also Peter falling asleep on the roof. Paul, did you have a comment or question?
I was going to say some answer, but yeah, the dreams to Joseph, and so our cessationist take on that would be that while God can still do miracles and he can give significant dreams, that there's no gifting anymore since Pentecost, that the miraculous gifts, whether they be healing or interpretation of dreams or miracles.
Yeah, it probably does need to be said that at least nowadays, I don't think God reveals maybe he does occasionally to someone who's awaiting a missionary in some far off place in Africa. But he generally does not reveal things to you and me through dreams, at least based on the kinds of dreams I have. I'm very glad that's not true. Because you wake up and you're like, I'm very glad that was a dream. Paul?
I was going to just refer back to what you said. Is that okay if I
Yeah, do it.
Yeah, thank you really explained. Something I hadn't thought of, and that's that Joseph he really had to persevere in believing that dream, as he thought it was from God, that he as a type of Christ would be exalted in some way, and that it's carrying on the deep theme of Genesis, which is that Abraham was justified, he believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness for Abraham. And Joseph, it said, like Romans 4, even though his body was as good as dead, he hoped against hope that God was able to do it. That's Abraham. When he was promised a baby, he had 75. So Daniel had to do the same. Even in prison, he had to hope that God would keep his promise. Just like we continue to hope in our suffering and humiliation that we'll be exalted with Christ. So it is at the heart of it.
Yeah, and I think the thing to try to let sink into our brains this morning is that God has promised good things for his people, for you. And sometimes you're in the position of Joseph and thinking, the evidence of my life kind of looks like exactly the opposite right now. Like I cannot possibly conceive of how God is going to bless me through these terrible things that have happened to me, or how he's going to eventually make me glad that these things happened. It doesn't make sense to me at all. We don't get access to Joseph's thought process here. Paul says he seems to be clinging to the idea that those dreams will eventually come true. He can't be talking to two pagans and saying, your dreams will come true, and then to Pharaoh, your dreams will come true, but God doesn't love me, my dreams will never come true. He must believe the dreams will come true eventually, but it's got to be a hard fight to hang on to that when all evidence to the contrary. And this is what we see in our lives. We see, all evidence to the contrary. I don't feel like God is making my life a blessing right now. But you may feel differently in the future, and you will. Doug?
This might be a bit of a stretch, but I like to do that. So Jesus is interpreting dreams. One of the cupbearers is responsible for wine. one of the bakers who's responsible for the bread. And
Wow, I hadn't thought of that.
he then therefore casts one into hell and one into heaven with his interpretations. And he is the prototypical Christ.
Interesting. So there's Christ going through hell and then also into heaven. Is that what you're pointing to?
I'm saying he's the judge of the world.
Okay, right.
He's judging one to hell and
Yeah.
one to heaven.
I didn't make the connection there between the bread and the wine. That's pretty interesting. Should have been a no-brainer, right? But I'm ancient Egypt. I just didn't make the connection there. Let me move on for a little bit and say a couple of other things about this chapter. Let's get through the rest of the chapter, and I'll see if anybody has any other comments or questions. So now we get to Joseph. He's actually going to interpret the dreams. Okay? There's a nice sort of literary structure here in verses 10 through 13, if you want to just look at those. Oops, sorry, I'm ahead of myself here. So the cupbearer goes first. He says, there were 3 branches. And then we have 3 sets of 3 actions to follow that up. So the first thing he says, it budded, blossomed, grapes. That's one set of 3. And then cup was in my hand, took the grapes. Cup was in my hand is not an action. Took the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Second set of 3. And then in 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head, restore you to office, and you'll place the cup in his hand. So there's 3 sets of 3 showing that this is how your dream is going to come true, and this is why there were 3 branches in the dream. It's just kind of a neat literary touch showing that God doesn't do things by accident. Okay? And then Joseph then says, now that I've given you this good interpretation and you're going to go back to Pharaoh, can you remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. And as I'm reading that sentence aloud, I'm thinking, here is a glimpse into Joseph's heart. I mean, this is very emotionally weighted language. And incidentally, the word kindness there is, for those of you who read the Old Testament much, it's chesed. That's the word used frequently, constant in the Old Testament for the loving kindness of God. And whenever you see in your translation, steadfast love, that's chesed. It's perhaps the epitome of expression of God's faithful covenant and love for us. So Joseph uses that word. When it's well with you, please, he says, do me the kindness, just mention me. I don't need a fanfare. Just please, can you just mention me? And please get me out of this house, indicating that he would rather not be here in prison. So we see into his heart there, and how he's perhaps remembering the Lord's steadfast love. And I think, and then if we go to the next verse, where he recounts his background, he says, I was stolen out of the land of Hebrews. John points out that as a rather polite and diplomatic way of expressing what happened to him. He was sold, betrayed by his brothers, but he phrases it so as not to impugn them. And then he says, I've done nothing that they should put me into the pit. Again, we see into his heart. He realizes, I'm here. This is not my fault. And he uses the pit word, indicating that even though he's not talking about what his brothers did to him, it still hurts and he still remembers it. And this experience feels like that one. Betrayal, the false accusation, and going from high to low like that. And I just wrote in my notes, how absurd and unattainable must his dreams seem now, that he's in this prison and nobody knows he's here. He's in a foreign country. He's got no way to contact his family. They're hundreds of miles away. It's crazy. But nonetheless, when the cupbearer goes up there, he doesn't say anything. Frankly, I can kind of understand the cupbearer, that he's like, I was in prison, and my friend, the baker, he got killed. So now I'm back in Pharaoh's presence again. I'm going to be up on my best behavior and on the up and up, and there's no way I want to talk to Pharaoh about the stuff that got me in trouble some time ago. I'm not mentioning that again. You can kind of understand where he's at and say, do you remember Pharaoh? Remember when you threw me in prison? It would be very, very awkward to bring that up, especially if the relationship has been restored to its norms. I kind of understand that he didn't want to remember. Nonetheless, these dreams, even though it seems to, if you go down to 41 verse 1, take a look at that. The poor translators are having trouble with this. It says 2 whole years. If you have a different translation, it might say 2 full years. Okay? So the Hebrew 2 is 2. There's not a bunch of different words for that. 2 is 2. But the word full there, I think I'm remembering the spelling of this, is that. You know this Hebrew word. That's the Hebrew word for day. That's the Hebrew word used in Genesis chapter 1, on the first day. It's the word that scholars argue over about how much time is meant by that, right? And so the writer and then the translator, struggling to express the length of time that Joseph spent in prison, says 2 day years, which is a very strange expression, reminding me of that famous but very potent statement of how time flies. The days are long, but the years are short. Yeah, the days are long, but the years are short. Have you heard that? Yeah, and sometimes it feels like days are going to take forever, and then suddenly you're like, wow, was that really 6 years ago? It feels like it was just yesterday. Anyway, they didn't quite know how to express the drudging of the time, this 2 years that's gone by. Nonetheless, this dream interpretation that Joseph performed here did become the means of getting him out of prison. It did. It just took a while. Okay? And here's the key. This is the last thing I have to say about chapter 40, and then we can move on, or I'll see if you guys have any comments or questions. If the cupbearer had bounced right out of prison and immediately done what he promised, and said to Pharaoh, you wouldn't believe we got this guy in prison. His name, he told me about this dream thing, and it came true, et cetera, et cetera. And then 2 years later, Pharaoh had a dream. Would Pharaoh even have remembered that he had a dream interpreter in prison? Probably not. 2 years is a pretty long time. So there's a reason. There's a divinely orchestrated reason why the cupbearer didn't do as Joseph asked him to do. Why the cupbearer didn't, as it were, answer Joseph's prayers. Because it had to wait 2 years. And at that point in time, it was time for Joseph to come out of prison. And the cupbearer says to Pharaoh, oh, by the way, now that you've had these terrible dreams and no one can interpret them, I can help you out. There's a guy in prison that does this. And the timing on that is perfect. If the cupbearer had done it immediately, that very likely might not have happened. Joseph maybe would have languished longer in prison and it would have been a blip. What would have caused Pharaoh to remember something said to him casually 2 years earlier? Nothing. So there is a divine hand orchestrating all this. Joseph's got to be thinking, it's been 2 years. Didn't that guy do what I asked? I begged him. Didn't he do what I asked? And he's got to be wondering what happened. I've been forgotten again. But not quite. You've not been forgotten by God. So again, we hammer this away. It's the principal lesson of Joseph, that even when circumstances look like they're conspiring against you, God has a plan. And you often won't figure it out until much, much later. Any other thoughts or comments on that? That's pretty much everything I wanted to say about chapter 40. Anybody? It's not a terribly long or complex chapter. Doug, go ahead.
Here in verse 14, he said, get me out of this house. And then in verse 15, I've done nothing that they should put me into the pit. I thought that was interesting.
You mean the house-pit dichotomy there?
Yeah, like these houses didn't have basements, so
Yeah.
he was in a house. And so when he said pit, he might have been referring to his brother's throwing him in the well.
And how it feels. This feels the same. Yep. Yeah, we get the feeling this is in the basement, but I don't know. I don't know if the Egyptians were in the habit of digging. Basements in a sandy country are not too easy to dig or maintain. So it may have been a metaphorical pit that Joseph is talking about. Anyone else? Okay, well, 41 as you can see, chapter 40 is 23 verses long. I think it's the shortest chapter in the Joseph narrative. Chapter 41 is 57, almost 3 times as long. So we are not going to get through all of it today. Let me see if I can break it up and maybe we don't have to read the whole thing all at once. Let me take a look here. Yeah, let's just do down to 16 for now. Just do down to verse 16 for now. And that's, I didn't even end at a paragraph break, but that's all right. That is where the story turns around. I'll get started here. I'll read 1 to 4. That's the end of Pharaoh's first dream. Michael, can you read 5 to the end of 8 for us, Pharaoh's second dream? Dan, would you read 9 to the end of 13 for us? A little interaction there. And then Emily, can you read 14, 15, and 16 for us? And you might as well read 17 as well. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. And behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows, and Pharaoh awoke.
And he fell asleep and dreamed the second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump, full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So in the morning his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh.
Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. We dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged.
Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer.
Okay, that's good enough. I don't know why I wanted to throw 17 in there. So that's a good stopping place because Joseph is pointing. We clearly see that Joseph still has great faith, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the beginning of the chapter. Every dream in this narrative of Joseph's life comes in pairs. Did you notice that? Joseph had 2 dreams about things bowing down before him. And then we had the baker and the cupbearer. They both had dreams, which were similar. And then Pharaoh has 2 dreams, which are also similar. So when God wants to reveal to people his will in this passage, he sort of confirms it with a double dream and says, this is it's not an accident. You weren't just having a hallucination because you ate something weird. Here's 2 dreams. Pay attention to this. And it's been pointed out, this is a very Egyptian dream. It feels very Egyptian. The entire Egyptian culture centered around the Nile. And the Nile was, if I'm recalling correctly, one of their gods and goddesses who provided all the water and fertility that they needed. And much of their national life depended on the fullness or sometimes the dryness of the Nile. So with the cows standing by the Nile and then they feeding in the reed grass, it's reminding us of that dependence, of the culture's dependence on the Nile for fruitfulness and livestock. And I think it's comical that these guys, the magicians who clearly had been doing this, and they must have been used to interpret dreams in the past, or Pharaoh would not have consulted them. They couldn't even come up with a bogus explanation. I don't know if they were thinking, we come up with a false explanation, we're going to get in big trouble. Or if just the nature of the dream was just so weird and creepy that they were freaked out by it and thought, we're not going anywhere near that one. But they didn't even bother trying to come up with a fake one. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Linda?
I was just thinking how dangerous it must have been to be an interpreter of dreams.
Yeah.
If it doesn't come true,
Yeah.
you don't know what you're talking about. And so maybe they were at a point like, I don't want to touch this one. This
Yeah.
one is pretty different. But, it's not like meteorology today where you sort of kind of get it right.
Yes. Variable cloudiness. Yeah, I'm remembering that somebody's going to have to help me out. It's been so long. Was it Daniel who was going to interpret a dream, but then the king said, I don't want you to just interpret my dream. You got to tell me what the dream was first. And that way I'll know for sure that you really are speaking the truth. Was that Daniel, am I remembering correctly? Yeah. Happily, Pharaoh did not do that to Joseph here. He is going to give him a long and very detailed account of the dream before Joseph answers it. So they had to realize if we give an interpretation of this dream and it's wrong, that's really going to be bad. So they just kept mum on the deal. Yes, Avery?
I think it is interesting how you say it's a very Egyptian dream and that God works within culture and what would be most striking
Right.
to Pharaoh.
Yeah.
If he used all this Old Testament Hebrew imagery, it wouldn't affect Pharaoh in the same way.
Yeah, in other words, he got him where it counts. Yeah.
He tailors what he said to the people who need to hear it.
Yep, and the Nile was so vitally important that we can understand why Pharaoh was so disturbed by this dream. That it really went right to the heart of national life. And he realizes something significant is going on here and is able to speak to that culture in its own terms, is at the point that Avery's making, if I understand correctly. Good. Did I see another hand up someplace? I thought I did. Yeah, Mona?
I wouldn't say that the dreams in prison were similar because they had two totally different outcomes.
Yeah, they did. Isn't there something about lifting up the head? Yeah. I think there's something about lifting in both dreams. I'd have to go back through and remind myself of them. But each dream applies to the job of the person. So I guess that's about as far as the similarity goes, considering that they had different jobs, but radically different outcomes. It's interesting too, I'm only just thinking of this, that there's nothing intrinsic in the dream that would suggest one was good news and one was bad news. It's just left to Joseph to interpret that, and in that sense, they are very different.
One is squeezing grapes. Grapes and squeeze, they ripen, grapes ripen. And the other one, the birds are eating the bread out of the top basket.
Right. So in one of them, the product is going to Pharaoh, and the other it's not. So that would have been contrary to what I just said. That would have indicated that something was fishy in that second dream. That the baker was not doing his job of getting the bread to Pharaoh, and also, birds prey on dead bodies. So maybe there was a sort of implication there of the old carrion crow, as it's called. I also think it's interesting to me. One of I just think this. What amazes me constantly is about this story of Joseph is the way it is written and the way the information is conveyed to us is so clear that, and it doesn't really need any adjustment for a modern audience to understand it, even though it's like 3,500 years old. And trust me, if you went back and read some of the ancient literature from that time period, you would need a lot of help. This may shock you. I don't want to lose my job as adult Sunday school teacher, but there is a book that's older than the Bible. Did you know this? It's the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's a Syrian, and it was found in a library at Nineveh. And while Moses is writing, somebody can help me out, I think it's about 1700 BC. Is that about right? Does anybody remember? It's around there. They're not sure how old Gilgamesh is. It goes back to somewhere between 4000 and 2000 BC. So you have some. So it's been around longer. That doesn't mean it's truer. It just means it was written down earlier. By the way, Gilgamesh has a flood narrative in it, which is almost exactly like the one in Genesis. It's really interesting. But when I do Gilgamesh with my co-op students, they need a lot of help to read a book that's that old. 3,000, 4,000 years, 4 or 5,000 years old. It really is, even translated into English, it's like reading a foreign language. The narrative's all a mess, it's all in pieces, some of it doesn't connect. You need historians to help explain stuff that's going on culturally. That's not the case with the Genesis story. I mean, it comes leaping off the page like it was written down in the 20th century. I just love this, this poignant narrative of the cupbearer. He says, I remember my offenses today. And Pharaoh was angry with his servants. And then the way he narrates it, a young Hebrew was there with us. It just feels so clearly written and so beautifully structured as a narrative. I'm always struck by that. And one of my favorite moments is verse 14. So in that verse, even though the verse itself is kind of long, I suppose it's got about 25 words in it, that verse is an enormous change for Joseph. He goes from the bottom to the top in the space of one verse, about 25 words. He is rushed, quickly brought him out of the pit with only a stop to change his clothing and be shaved. Now, those of you who are boomers like me, you remember the song Walk Like an Egyptian. I can't even remember who the band was. I think it was the Bangles, right? Yeah. And that's because the Egyptians had not mastered three-dimensional painting, so all the Egyptians would go like this. So you've seen paintings of Egyptians, right? You've seen these Egyptian paintings, the ones from the caves and from inside. Ever seen an Egyptian with a beard? No. That's because this is a culturally true detail here, one that gives extreme authenticity to the story. Not only did the Egyptians carefully keep themselves shaved, and now we're picturing Yul Brynner, who even shaved the top of his head in the Ten Commandments, but they actually considered it a little weird, like the beard was like unsanitary, or it was something that was only used by foreigners. And Joseph has been in prison now for at least 2 years, probably a little bit more, so he's probably got a heck of a beard down there. So they quit. It's just that little detail thrown in there that gives this aroma of authenticity to the story, that Joseph had to be shaved before he could be brought into Pharaoh's presence, because this was considered unseemly in that culture. And he gets a change of clothes. Up till now, Joseph's huge changes in status have all been marked by taking off his clothing, taking his robe, and then Potiphar's wife stripping off his clothing and saying, look what this Hebrew did. Now that is reversed, because clothing is given to him, and that is reversed again at the end of the chapter. We haven't read that far, but it's in verse 42. Pharaoh took a signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand and clothed him in garments of fine linen. So this completes the rapid reversal of Joseph's fortunes, both of his downfalls beginning with stripped off clothing. So you could do a whole master's thesis probably on clothing in the story of Joseph and Judah in chapter 38 also has some clothing in it. So that's kind of interesting. And then Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in me, God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. And that too is interesting for a whole bunch of reasons. First of all, Joseph just flatly states to the most powerful man in the entire Middle East, God's going to interpret your dream for you and it'll be true. He hasn't even heard the dream yet. Okay? He's seen that the other two dreams were fulfilled, His earlier dreams back in chapter 37 have not been fulfilled, but he's got a statement of faith. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. He says, I'm not me. Before he does anything for Pharaoh, he points to God and says, I want you to, whatever information I give you, it's coming from my God. And I don't know the details here because I just don't know, and none of the commentators commented on this, but later on, Pharaoh uses the word God in the singular. He uses the word God, and I think if you were a good Egyptian, you got a pantheon of gods. So Joseph is sort of teaching him a little bit by saying there's one, not 15 like you guys have. And he also, and the word favorable there, that's the Hebrew word shalom. Isn't that interesting? That's the Hebrew word that's usually translated as peace. God will give you a peaceable answer. Okay? And so much later we see that Pharaoh sort of picks up this same word from verse 16 and has perhaps already begun to acknowledge that there just might be something about this Hebrew God. And I think that's probably where I'm going to end here. I wanted to get a little further along, but we are going to have to do the rest of chapter 41 next week. And that's where all the excitement happens, where Joseph is rapidly elevated to an incredibly powerful position. And let's pray now, and we'll get back to this next week. Father and Lord Christ, Holy Spirit, we see that you want us to know not to gauge life by our actual experiences in the moment. We never can tell what you are doing, what your plan is, how things are going to turn out very differently, how we might look back and see things in a very different light in the long run. It is hard to do that in the moment, especially when we're struggling. And so we pray that we would have some of Joseph's peace and some of Joseph's faith, and that you would continue to feed that faith in the coming out worship hour and grant us also a restful Sabbath. For we pray in your name, Lord Christ. Amen.